June 7, 1943, somewhere over the Solomon Islands. The Pacific sky erupts with anti-aircraft fire as 23 American Hellcats engage a Japanese formation. Lieutenant Thomas "Tommy" Reynolds, barely 20 years old, pilots his F-6F through clouds torn apart by tracer rounds. His hands shake slightly on the controls, not from fear, but from the adrenaline surge of his third combat mission. In the squadron ready room that morning, veteran Imperial Japanese Navy pilots had been discussed with reverence bordering on myth, men with hundreds of combat hours, aces who'd cut their teeth over China years before Pearl Harbor. Reynolds, by contrast, has 17 flight hours in a Hellcat and no confirmed kills. Across the formation, Commander Jackson Ellis, 34, watches the rookie with concern. "Keep it tight, Bambi," he warns through the crackling radio, using the call sign that had stuck to Reynolds since his first awkward carrier landing. The nickname had spread among captured radio transmissions to the Japanese pilots as well. American baby pilots, a recovered intelligence transcript had quoted as Zero Ace. They send children to fight samurai. The Imperial pilots specifically targeted newcomers, exploiting their inexperience and hesitation. Reynolds represented everything they looked for: young, tentative, an easy mark in the unforgiving arithmetic of aerial combat. 7,000 feet below on the carrier USS Lexington, Admiral William Montgomery reviews reconnaissance photographs with his intelligence officer. "They're feeding fresh pilots into a meat grinder," the intelligence officer observes, sliding a statistical report across the polished table. 37% casualty rate for pilots, with fewer than 5 combat missions. Montgomery says nothing, studying a map of Japanese strongholds across the scattered Pacific Islands. The weight of these numbers translates into letters he personally signs to parents across America. What no one, not the Admiral, not Commander Ellis, certainly not the Japanese veterans, understands is that Thomas Reynolds isn't quite what he seems. Beneath his boyish appearance and fresh-faced inexperience lies something that operational statistics and combat doctrines haven't accounted for. The variables that will transform this mission don't appear in any briefing room assessment. As 27 Japanese Zeros emerge from the cloud bank, Reynolds instinctively tightens his formation position. Through his canopy, he can see the distinctive silhouettes, the rising sun insignia brilliant against the aircraft's pale fuselage. For a moment, both formations maintain course, sizing each other up across half a mile of empty Pacific sky. The silence stretches, broken only by the steady drone of engines and occasional terse radio checks. Commander Ellis's voice cuts through the tension. "Break formation, engage at will." The American formation dissolves into individual fighters, each pilot selecting targets in the disciplined chaos of aerial combat. Reynolds banks sharply, his movements mechanical, following the engagement protocols drilled into him at flight school. Everything proceeding exactly as hundreds of similar Pacific engagements had unfolded before. A Zero slides into Reynolds' sights momentarily, then executes a vertical climb that no American pilot would attempt at this altitude, a testament to the Japanese aircraft's superior maneuverability, if not its durability. Reynolds doesn't pursue, recognizing the textbook trap. From the corner of his eye, he spots another Zero dropping into position behind his wingman, Lieutenant Parker. "Break right, Parker. You've got one on your 6, Reynolds calls, banking his Hellcat sharply toward his endangered squadmate. Parker rolls right, but too slowly. The Zero's machine guns flash, bullets tear through Parker's right wing, sending aluminum fragments spinning away in the slipstream. Parker's Hellcat shudders but holds together, diving toward the relative safety of the lower cloud deck. The Zero pilot, pursuing his damaged prey, doesn't register Reynolds' approach until too late. Reynolds closes to 200 yards, point-blank range for aerial gunnery, and squeezes his trigger. 6 .50 caliber machine guns hammer in unison, their synchronized fire converging at 400 yards. The Zero disintegrates under the onslaught, its light construction no match for the American plane's devastating firepower. One moment it's a lethal fighting machine, the next, a shower of debris falling toward the Pacific. Reynolds has no time to process his first kill. 2 more Zeros have spotted him, recognizing his flying style as that of a newcomer. They coordinate with practiced efficiency, one approaching from above, another circling to cut off his retreat toward the American formation. Through the radio, Reynolds can hear Commander Ellis. "Bambi, you've got two bandits converging. Get out of there." Standard procedure is clear. Disengage, use the Hellcat's superior dive speed to escape, live to fight another day. Rookies who try to dogfight with veteran Zero pilots become statistics in Admiral Montgomery's reports. Reynolds knows this. His instructors drilled these survival tactics into every pilot. When outnumbered, when cornered, run. What happens next defies explanation in the official after-action report. Later, analysts will review gun camera footage frame by frame, trying to deconstruct the sequence of events to extract some tactical lesson from what witnesses describe. None will fully succeed. Reynolds cuts his throttle suddenly, an amateur mistake that makes Ellis curse into his oxygen mask. The pursuing Zero overshoots, its pilot not expecting such a basic error. But what looks like panic is calculated timing. As the Zero flashes past, Reynolds slams the throttle forward, kicks his rudder, and executes a maneuver that his plane shouldn't be capable of, a modified hammerhead stall that points his nose directly at the second approaching Zero. The Japanese pilot has a split-second glimpse of the American plane achieving an impossible firing position before Reynolds' guns erupt again. The Zero's cockpit disappears in a direct hit, the aircraft cartwheeling with sudden violent energy, its fuel tanks igniting in a bloom of orange flame against the deep blue Pacific sky. The first Zero has recovered and turns tight, bringing its weapons to bear on Reynolds. They meet head-on, closing at over 500 miles per hour, neither pilot yielding in a lethal game of chicken. Both fire. Bullets from the Zero punch through Reynolds' left wing, narrowly missing his cockpit. The Hellcat's superior firepower again proves decisive. The Zero's engine erupts in flame, black smoke pouring from its cowling. The Japanese pilot rolls inverted and drops away. Whether a controlled escape or uncontrolled plummet, Reynolds can't tell. "Bambi has 3 kills, Ellis's incredulous voice reports over the squadron frequency. "Confirm that. 3 kills, single engagement." The dogfight continues for 11 minutes, an eternity in aerial combat terms. When it concludes, the Japanese formation has lost 11 aircraft against 3 American losses. Reynolds lands his damaged Hellcat on the Lexington with textbook precision despite a partially severed hydraulic line and 217 bullet holes in his aircraft. Deck crews count the damage with professional interest as they patch the wounded aircraft, already calculating repair times and replacement parts. In the intelligence debriefing room, Reynolds sits with a cup of coffee that grows cold as he methodically recounts each engagement. His descriptions are precise, technical, devoid of the embellishment typical of first-time victors. Lieutenant Commander Howard Thorne, the Air Group intelligence officer, studies the young pilot with unconcealed curiosity. "Your previous flight evaluations noted hesitation in combat maneuvers," Thorne remarks, reviewing a manila folder. "Instructor comments suggest adequate but unremarkable gunnery skills." Reynolds shrugs. "Guess I'm a late bloomer, sir." What the reports don't show, what Reynolds himself doesn't volunteer, is his background before the war. While other pilots came from college football teams or prestigious flight schools, Reynolds had spent his teenage years crop dusting in central Nebraska. From age 14, he'd flown decrepit biplanes through power lines and around water towers, executing maneuvers no flight instructor would sanction, learning aircraft control through thousands of hours of seat-of-the-pants flying that no formal training could replicate. The son of a barnstormer who'd flown in the Great War, Reynolds had literally grown up in cockpits, his father's crop-dusting service providing the family's precarious livelihood through the Depression years. When engine trouble meant going hungry, Reynolds had learned mechanical systems with the deep understanding that came from survival necessity. While the Navy measured his flight hours from his commissioning date, Reynolds had been flying since before he could drive a car. This background remained absent from his service record, partly due to his own reticence, partly because nobody had asked. The Navy needed pilots desperately, and Reynolds had passed the qualification tests. That was enough. In the officers' wardroom that evening, the atmosphere shifts subtly as Reynolds enters. Conversations pause momentarily as pilots assess this suddenly proven commodity among them. Commander Ellis makes space at his table, a silent acknowledgement that transforms Reynolds' status more effectively than any medal or commendation. "The radio intercepts picked up something interesting," Ellis mentions casually, passing a bread basket. "Seems our Japanese friends were a bit surprised by Bambi's performance." Reynolds focuses on his meal. They underestimated me. Happens a lot. They're calling you trickster now, Ellis continues, a hint of amusement in his voice. Apparently, they believe you deliberately presented as inexperienced to lure their pilots into a trap. A ghost of a smile crosses Reynolds' face, the first since returning from the mission. Couldn't have planned it better if I tried. The next morning, Admiral Montgomery summons Reynolds to the flag bridge. The Admiral studies the young pilot with the contemplative gaze of a man who has sent too many boys to their deaths in the vast Pacific theater. Lieutenant Reynolds, Montgomery begins without preamble, your performance yesterday was extraordinary. 3 confirmed kills in a first engagement hasn't happened since Lieutenant O'Hare at the Marshalls. He pauses, tapping a classified intelligence folder. We've been analyzing Japanese combat tactics, trying to understand how they maintain superiority despite our technical advantages. Your engagement provides some interesting insights. Reynolds stands at ease, his posture relaxed in a way that suggests comfort with authority, rare in junior officers. Just did what needed doing, sir. What interests me, Montgomery continues, is that you disregarded standard evasion protocols. By doctrine, you should have disengaged when outnumbered 2-1. The Admiral's tone carries no criticism, only professional curiosity. Yet you chose to engage directly, using tactics we don't teach. Reynolds considers his response carefully. With respect, sir, the Japanese have studied our standard procedures. They anticipate our disengagement patterns because that's what we've trained everyone to do. Sometimes being unpredictable is tactically sound. Montgomery nods slowly. Commander Ellis tells me you've shown remarkable improvement since arriving on carrier, almost as if I'd been flying a lot longer than my service record indicates, Reynolds finishes. My father operated a crop dusting service, sir. I've been handling aircraft since I was 14 years old. Understanding dawns in Montgomery's expression. And this wasn't noted in your service record because nobody asked about civilian experience, sir. The intake officers were only concerned with my training performance. Montgomery laughs, a rare sound on the flag bridge. So while we've been sending what we thought were green pilots against Japanese veterans, some of us aren't quite as green as our service records suggest, Reynolds confirms. 3 days later, Reynolds leads a 4-plane element on a strike mission against Japanese shipping near Bougainville. Intelligence reports indicate the presence of at least 2 Japanese air groups protecting the convoy. Experienced pilots specifically deployed to counter American carrier operations. Before takeoff, Commander Ellis pulls Reynolds aside on the flight deck, the thundering preparations of launching aircraft nearly drowning his words. They'll be expecting you now. The element of surprise is gone. Reynolds tightens his parachute straps, the morning sun glinting off his canopy. Then we'll have to give them something new to think about. Ellis studies him for a moment. Your section has 2 actual rookies. Carter and Williams have exactly 7 combat hours between them. They'll have more when we get back, Reynolds replies with quiet confidence. As the strike force forms up over the rendezvous point, Reynolds' voice comes through the radio, addressing his element. Carter, Williams, forget everything they taught you about engaging Zeros. Watch what I do. We're going to show them some crop duster specials today. The engagement that follows becomes a case study in naval aviation tactical development. Reynolds leads his section directly into the Japanese formation, deliberately presenting as vulnerable targets. When the Japanese veterans move to exploit this apparent mistake, Reynolds' element executes a series of coordinated maneuvers that naval aviators would later call Reynolds' Weave, a combat box formation that maximizes the Hellcat's strengths while negating the Zero's turning advantage. By mission's end, Reynolds' 4-plane element has downed 7 Japanese aircraft without losses. More significantly, they've protected the main strike force, allowing successful bombing runs against 2 Japanese transports and a light cruiser. When they recover on the Lexington, Admiral Montgomery is waiting on the flight deck, breaking protocol to meet the pilots as they climb from their cockpits. News of Reynolds' tactics spreads through the fleet. Within 2 weeks, veterans and rookies alike are practicing variations of his unconventional approaches. Commander Ellis establishes an informal combat tactics working group, with Reynolds providing insights that challenge established doctrine. The Japanese, meanwhile, report encounters with a new breed of American pilot, unpredictable, aggressive, technically skilled in ways their intelligence assessments hadn't prepared them for. By late July 1943, Reynolds has accumulated 14 confirmed kills and leads his own squadron. The Bambi call sign has given way to trickster, even among American pilots. More importantly, squadron casualty rates for new pilots dropped by 23% as Reynolds' methods spread through the air groups. Admiral Montgomery, presenting these statistics to Pacific Fleet Command, makes a case for systematic re-evaluation of combat training. We've been operating under the assumption that formalized military flight training is the only path to producing effective combat pilots, he argues. Lieutenant Reynolds' case suggests we should be identifying and leveraging civilian flying experience more effectively. The resulting program, Operation Barnstormer, begins screening naval aviation candidates for prior civilian flight experience, particularly in demanding environments like crop dusting, bush flying, and aerobatics. Pilots with these backgrounds receive specialized tactical training that builds on their unorthodox skill sets, rather than replacing them with standardized procedures. On September 12, 1943, a Japanese Betty bomber on a reconnaissance mission is shot down near Guadalcanal. Among the recovered documents is an intelligence assessment of American naval aviation tactics, specifically mentioning the Reynolds problem, the Japanese term for their inability to predict American engagement patterns since the emergence of these new approaches. Lieutenant Commander Thorne brings the translated document to Reynolds, who reads it with a mixture of pride and humility. They're adapting already, Reynolds notes, pointing to analysis of recent engagements. See here, they're developing counters to the weave pattern. Thorne nods. It's becoming an evolutionary arms race. They adjust, we adjust. Reynolds sets the document aside. Then we'll need to stay unpredictable. Bring me every pilot who drove a tractor before they flew a plane, who learned stick and rudder by the seat of their pants rather than a manual. The farm boys, the mechanical tinkerers, the ones who understand aircraft as living things rather than mathematical equations. Over the next 8 months, Reynolds' approach transforms naval aviation combat effectiveness. Traditional pilots and barnstormers begin cross-training, creating hybrid tactics that Japanese intelligence struggles to categorize. Veteran Japanese pilots, expecting by-the-book engagements, instead encounter American formations that shift tactics mid-battle, presenting complex problems that can't be solved with existing doctrine. Admiral Montgomery, reviewing combat effectiveness reports in early 1944, notes a statistical anomaly. Pilots with extensive civilian experience, once integrated into Reynolds' tactical framework, achieve kill ratios 37% higher than their traditionally trained counterparts. More significantly, their survival rates exceed predictions by similar margins. It's not just about flying skill, Reynolds explains when questioned about these results. It's about mindset. Civilian pilots, especially those who flew challenging missions, learned to solve problems creatively. They didn't have doctrine to fall back on when things went wrong. They survived by innovation and instinct. By summer 1944, the tactical revolution sparked by Reynolds' initial engagement has spread beyond naval aviation. Army Air Force groups in the Pacific begin adopting similar approaches, creating what General Curtis LeMay calls disciplined unpredictability, tactical frameworks that encourage controlled innovation within strategic parameters. Japanese air groups, meanwhile, find themselves caught in a paradoxical position. Their rigid training system, once a source of tactical superiority, now prevents the kind of adaptability needed to counter American innovations. Pilots trained to follow specific engagement patterns struggle against opponents who continuously evolve their approaches. In August 1944, Reynolds leads a major strike against Japanese installations in the Philippines. His squadron, now composed of a deliberate mix of traditional and barnstormer pilots, encounters the 204th Air Group, an elite Japanese unit specifically tasked with developing counters to American tactics. The engagement that follows becomes legendary in naval aviation circles. For 27 minutes over Luzon, both sides execute a complex aerial ballet of feints, traps, and countermaneuvers. The Japanese, having studied Reynolds' previous engagements, anticipate his initial approaches. What they don't expect is how quickly his formation adapts when these tactics prove ineffective, shifting to entirely new patterns mid-engagement. Reynolds' after-action report, unusually detailed for a combat document, becomes required reading at naval aviation training centers. The future of aerial combat lies not in rigid doctrine, but in tactical fluidity, he writes. We must train pilots to think creatively under pressure, to recognize when established procedures fail, and to innovate effectively within operational parameters. Admiral Montgomery, forwarding this report to Naval Operations Command, adds his own observation. Lieutenant Commander Reynolds has demonstrated that our greatest tactical advantage lies not in technical specifications or numerical superiority, but in our capacity for adaptive thinking. The American pilot's greatest weapon is his ingenuity. By war's end, Reynolds has accumulated 27 confirmed kills and trained over 200 pilots in his methods. More significantly, the tactical revolution he sparked has become standard doctrine, incorporating the once radical notion that combat effectiveness stems from adaptive thinking rather than rigid procedure. In the final analysis, what began with a single engagement, a rookie pilot surprising Japanese veterans with unexpected skill, evolved into a fundamental reassessment of how aerial combat should be approached. The Japanese pilots who laughed at Bambi never fully understood what they'd encountered, not just a skilled individual, but a harbinger of a new American approach that valued innovation over tradition, adaptation over doctrine. Thomas Reynolds returned to Nebraska after the war, establishing a flight school that specialized in teaching advanced handling techniques to civilian pilots. His combat innovations, however, lived on in naval aviation tactical development, influencing generations of fighter pilots who never knew the origins of the approaches they studied. In 1962, during a naval aviation symposium at Pensacola, a retired Admiral Montgomery gave perhaps the most fitting epitaph for the tactical revolution that began on that June day in 1943. The Japanese pilots who underestimated Lieutenant Reynolds weren't just encountering an individual. They were facing the American capacity to reinvent ourselves under pressure, to take conventional wisdom and turn it on its head when circumstances demand. In that sense, Reynolds wasn't an anomaly. He was the quintessential American fighter pilot. The document that recorded the initial engagement, the one where a rookie supposedly shot down 3 veteran pilots in his first real dogfight, remains in naval archives. Its yellowing pages a testament to the day when an underestimated farm boy from Nebraska changed the course of aerial warfare in the Pacific. The final notation added by Commander Ellis perhaps best captures the significance. Detwined. Reynolds' performance today suggests we've been measuring the wrong variables in pilot assessment. Technical proficiency matters less than adaptive capacity. The pilot who can rewrite the rules mid-engagement is worth a dozen who follow doctrine perfectly. In the airspace where that engagement occurred, nothing remains to mark the event. The Pacific waters have long since closed over the fallen aircraft of both sides. Yet in the tactical doctrines of modern fighter aviation, in the emphasis on creativity and adaptation under pressure, echoes of Thomas Reynolds' approach remain, a living legacy more meaningful than any memorial could be. The Japanese pilots who laughed at the American kid encountered something they couldn't quantify in their intelligence assessments: the transformative power of perspective. Reynolds didn't just see aerial combat differently, he made others see it differently too. In doing so, he demonstrated that sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the most experienced or the most technically proficient, but the one who refuses to fight according to your expectations. Perhaps that's the most enduring lesson of Reynolds' story. In the complex calculus of warfare, the variables that matter most aren't always the ones we can measure. Sometimes victory goes not to the most skilled or the most experienced, but to those who bring fresh eyes to old problems, who see possibilities where others see only procedures. The American pilots who followed Reynolds' example became, in their own way, tricksters too. Shapeshifters who could transform from vulnerable rookies to lethal predators in the blink of an eye, who could rewrite tactical reality faster than their opponents could adapt. In that transformation lay not just their survival, but ultimately victory.